All right, let's talk about the biggest winners and losers of this offseason in the AFC. And there's going to be a team that's not on this list. And I think we should just get them out of the way right away. But everybody and their mom is glazing what the Las Vegas Raiders did this offseason. And do I think they're going to be better this year than they were last year? Well, yeah, they were the worst team in the NFL last year. But why are we pretending like this team has a legitimate chance to contend in the AFC West when there's teams like the Chargers who didn't really do a whole lot this offseason, but Justin Herbert with Mike McDaniels and 2 healthy offensive tackles, yeah, that's better than Fernando Mendoza throwing the ball to Jalen Nailor and Trey Tucker. Then you have the Kansas City Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes, and although Rashee Rice is going to spend 30 days in jail, he should still be ready for the start of the season. You can't cut out the Chiefs, especially the moves they made on the defensive side of the ball this offseason as well. And then you have the Denver Broncos, who were a Bo Nix injury away from making the Super Bowl last year. So I am all the way out on the Las Vegas Raiders. And I'm happy everybody is buying stock, because if this was like the stock market, that means their price is inflated and I would sell it. Hopefully their win total keeps climbing so I can hammer the under. I'm out on the Raiders. I think they're a better football team this year than they were last year. And I don't want to call them losers. Like, I'm going to go 2 losers, 2 winners from the AFC in this segment. But I don't think the Raiders are winners the way everybody else does. And I loved what they did in the draft. I think Traden Stukes, the safety from Arizona, is a dog. Rangy, great ball skills freak. And obviously Jermod McCoy was a projected top 10 pick a year ago. They got him with the first pick in the 4th round. That's insane value if he can stay healthy. But why would a player of that talent drop that far unless there were some real health concerns? But you could say the same thing about Will Johnson last year. Well, Jermod McCoy fell a whole extra round and a half farther than Will Johnson did. And Will Johnson fell out of the top 10, which he shouldn't have based on the tape because of the knee injury. And he looked really good last year as a rookie for Arizona. So I like what the Raiders did in the draft. I think they got terrific value. Traden Stukes. Trey Zune, the interior offensive lineman, which the interior line is still not ideal. And then Kerryon Crawford, the edge from Auburn, gets some nice edge depth because their edge room was going to be awful before the Ravens canceled a Max Crosby trade. But my gripe with the Raiders is what they did in free agency, and everybody was glazing. They spent $75 million on off-ball linebackers, and Nakobe Dean and Quay Walker, you could argue neither of those guys are even top 10 at their position, and they're both getting paid like top 10 off-ball linebackers. You just don't invest that much capital into a position that isn't like one of the most highly valued positions on your defense. Like, you can get away with having average off-ball linebacker play, but as long as you have good corners and a good pass rush, and they should have a good pass rush now because the Ravens canceled the Max Crosby trade. But their answer was going to be Malcolm Koonce and Kwity Paye. The interior of their defensive line is a joke. Their secondary is going to be way better this year because of the Traden Stukes pick, because they re-signed Eric Stokes, because they traded for Teron Johnson. I think their secondary is going to be fine. Jeremy Chin, I don't even know if Jamal Adams is still rostered. I guess he's kind of like a sub linebacker. So their defense, like Nakobe Dean and Quay Walker, are good players. I just don't like the asset management. Their offensive line is still sus. And then their answer at wide receiver was Jalen Nailor. So Jalen Nailor, Trey Tucker, and David Beck, that's what we're rolling out. And I understand Brock Bowers is there. I think Ashton Genty and Mike Washington Jr. are going to be one of the best 1-2 punches in the league next year because of what Tyler Linderbaum can bring in the run game as a center. But I think the Raiders, I'm not calling them losers, but I think they're getting a little bit overrated. I think we might see a little bit too much Raiders hype going into next season. That's just a train I will not be hopping on right now. And it also has nothing to do with Mendoza. I think Mendoza is a terrific prospect with a really high upside, a higher ceiling than a lot of people think. Like, he has a really strong arm. He's more mobile than people give him credit for. He's incredibly accurate. I feel like people are underselling the ceiling of Fernando Mendoza, saying he'll just be a Kirk Cousins. Like, I think his ceiling is higher than that. If he gets there, remains to be seen, because the offensive line is still meh. Colton Miller's a really good tackle. Tyler Linderbaum's obviously a really good center. The rest of the offensive line is meh. And then their receiving core is a joke, but they do have Brock Bowers. That definitely helps. But either way, I'm just totally not sold on the Raiders right now. But some winners. I think the biggest winner for me so far has been the Cincinnati Bengals. The Cincinnati Bengals were above 500 over the last 2 seasons in games Joe Burrow started, and their defense ranked 32nd in 2024 and 2025. So over the last 2 seasons, the Bengals have had the worst defense in the NFL, and in games where Joe Burrow started, they were still above 500. Now they add not Carter Bryant. Oh my gosh. I sold the clip too there, chat. That was going to be a good clip, but I sold it. Doesn't matter. They add Dexter Lawrence. They add Oh my gosh, Brian Cook, sorry, the corner or the safety from Kansas City. They draft Cassius Howell. They draft the guy in Takario Washington from Washington who was 4'4", 6'4" guy, 190, elite size speed combo at the corner position. And the biggest problem with the Bengals last year is that they had the third highest missed tackle rate in the NFL, particularly in the secondary with Jordan Battle and Geno Stone. Those guys couldn't tackle for shit. They bring in a guy in Brian Cook from Kansas City who had 11 missed tackles all year. Battle and Stone combined had 47. Brian Cook had the lowest missed tackle rate, second lowest missed tackle rate out of any safety in the league last year. Then they brought in Dexter Lawrence. Then they brought in, oh my gosh, I'm selling early and often here. The defensive tackle, Jonathan Allen, he was in Minnesota last year. He had Pro Bowl seasons in Washington. So I think the interior of that defensive line is going to be better. They're going to be better on the edge with Cassius Howell, with Shamar Stewart year 2, with Boya Mafe, who can set the edge in the run game and also give you some pass rush presence off the edge. Like their roster, their defensive depth chart is way more filled out this year than it was last year. And the fact that they were above 500 in games where Joe Burrow started with the 32nd ranked defense in the NFL, if this defense can be 20th, 21st, they could win 10, 11, 12 games. I think the Bengals had a terrific offseason. Brian Cook, Dexter Lawrence, Cassius Howell, Takario Washington. I think this is going to be one of the better offensive lines Joe Burrow's had so far in his career, even though they weren't the greatest last year. Armarius Mims is continuing to develop. Orlando Brown, they drafted an interior offensive lineman from Auburn in the middle rounds as well. So hopefully their offensive line is a little bit better. I think it should be. And then you have obviously Jamar, Chase Brown, T. Higgins, the best wide receiver duo in the NFL. Dare I say the best group of weapons in the NFL. So I love what the Bengals did. And my other winner, I'm only doing 2 winners today. The Tennessee Titans are having a terrific offseason. Brian Dable, home run hire at the offensive coordinator position. He won a playoff game with Daniel Jones as a starter. He helped develop Josh Allen. He helped develop Jalen Hurts at Oklahoma. He has just been a QB whisperer throughout his career, and you're giving Cam Ward, who is an ultra-talented prospect, a guy in Brian Dable to hone in on his talent. That's just next-level stuff, and they surrounded him with weapons. I mean, Wan'Dale Robinson and Carnell Tate, there's probably not a bigger increase in weapons out of any quarterback in the NFL this season than what Cam Ward's getting, from Shamire Dike and Elike Omener to Carnell Tate and Wan'Dale Robinson. And Wan'Dale Robinson, it looks like a lot of money up front, but a lot of it's incentive-based. It's a really, really team-friendly contract. And then defensively, I think the Titans are going to have one of the most slept-on, underrated defenses in the NFL next season. Keldrick Falk at the end of the first round, who needs a lot of polish in his pass rush ability. The production wasn't really there, but he's a freak athlete, and he's really good at setting the edge in the run game. John Franklin Myers, one of the best run defenders in the NFL, back-to-back 6.5 seasons, and he was really productive when he was with Bob Saleh in New York a couple of years ago. Jermaine Johnson had a Pro Bowl season when he was with Bob Saleh, Robert Saleh, in New York a couple of years ago. Cordell Flott and Alante Taylor are 2 really speedy, rangy, good ball skill type of corners. And keep in mind, Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed had the best years of their career in this Bob Saleh defense that doesn't run a lot of man-to-man coverage, and that's where Cordell Flott and Alante Taylor get exposed. I think this defense in Tennessee is going to be the catalyst of this team next year. They're going to be in a lot of tight games because of it. And then when it comes down to 2-minute offense, I trust Cam Ward to move the ball down the field when he has some type of weaponry. The only weakness still on this Titans team, you could argue, is their corners. Still, I know they addressed them. They were a little bit hefty on the money they gave Alante Taylor and Cordell Flott, but I think a Robert Saleh defense is so dependent on getting pressure that they don't need to be that sticky in coverage for that long. So I think they're really good scheme fit type of players who are fast, athletic, good ball skills. Their offensive line is still up in the air. I think if you can't protect Cam Ward, all the things I just said are a moot point. But they didn't address it, which tells me they probably have faith on the guys in the building. And Cam Ward is extremely mobile, hard guy to sack. It's tough. The O-line is not good, and I think that limits their ceiling next year. But again, they were one of the worst teams in the league. They're not going to fix everything in one offseason. I think they did a good job in surrounding Cam Ward with some good weaponry on the outside, and I think the defense is going to keep them in enough games where Cam Ward can be special in the 2-minute drill scenario, game-winning drives. Expect a lot of them from Cam Ward next season. So I like the Titans a lot. Now, the biggest losers so far in this year's offseason, the Jacksonville Jaguars. I mean, I still think they're going to be good next year. I'm not indicting them. I'm not saying they're going to be garbage, but they lost Devin Lloyd and they lost ETN. You could argue ETN was their most productive weapon on the offense last year. Devin Lloyd was an all-pro linebacker. They lost both of those guys. They didn't replace them. Their offensive line is not the greatest, and they didn't address it either. And every single pick in their draft class was deemed a reach according to the consensus board. Now, I don't know what data, like where this consensus board come from, like who are we gathering this consensus from? But then you look at the board and it's like, okay, I'm not totally sure where it all happened. I mean, they took a project tight end in the second round when they had Chris Brazzell, Romello Height, Julian Neal, Emmanuel McNeil-Warren. They had a plethora of guys that could be impact players on day one at positions of needs on the board, and they took a project tight end. That didn't make a lot of sense to me. They did take Emmanuel Pregnon, the guard out of Oregon. I did like that pick a lot. Only 7 sacks allowed in 4 years starting freak athlete. So that shows up the offensive line a little bit. But again, they lost Travis Etienne. They lost Greg Newsome. They lost Devin Lloyd. You could argue 2 of those guys were the most impactful players on their respective sides of the football last year. They didn't address it. Travis Hunter's going from wide receiver corner to just corner, so you could say they kind of lost a receiver. I still think they're going to be good. I think they have one of the best wide receivers, most underrated wide receiver rooms in the NFL with Parker Washington, who I think is incredibly underrated. Brian Thomas Jr., who had like 1,400 yards as a rookie, fell off a little bit last year. And then Jacoby Myers has just been consistent throughout his entire career. So I think their weapons are going to be good. I trust Liam Cohen. I don't trust their draft, but the fact that like they zigged when everybody else zagged, that kind of does speak to me just a little bit. But either way, I think the Jags are going to be good, but they got worse this offseason and they didn't kind of fill in the biggest positions that they lost. That's the thing with Jacksonville this offseason. I still think they're going to be good. Gladstone, also, it is interesting. Like, they didn't sign a bunch of guys. They extended a few guys. But I think they're going to get a lot of compensatory picks with losing Etienne, with losing Devin Lloyd. And I think the reason he didn't fully re-sign guys and fill those roles is so that he gets those picks. And I think that could be a smart strategy. I did just read that, so I don't know how much truth is in that, where, like, if you don't replace a player, then you get a compensatory pick. And Devin Lloyd, an all-pro, leaving. Travis Etienne, 1,000-yard scrimmage guy, back-to-back seasons, leaving. You're probably going to get like 3rd round, 4th round compensatories, and that's pretty solid at the end of the day. But easily the biggest loser in the AFC this year was the Miami Dolphins. The Miami Dolphins signed Malik Willis, and I loved Malik Willis. I think he was the best free agent available. I think if he was put in a good position to succeed, he has top 10 there. I think at one point I said top 5 upside, and I truly did believe that. But Miami has done nothing but made his position worse, made his job harder since he's got there. They traded away Jalen Waddle. They signed Malik Willis to a 3-year, however many $1 million deal, a big deal, and they trade away his number 1 receiver. They had the worst offensive line in the NFL last year. They only had 1 guy graded above a 61 on their offensive line per PFF. And PFF's not the Bible, but that's telling if you only had 1 guy graded above a 61 on your entire offensive line last year. And what did they do to address it? They drafted a project in Caden Proctor, whose tape was downright awful. He's just a behemoth of a man with a really high ceiling. They better develop him, and they better develop him quickly, because Malik Willis is a good scrambler. But if he's running for his life every time he drops back, and he's got Tutu Atwell and Jalen Tolbert trying to get open downfield for him, he's not going to succeed. His confidence is going to get shattered. Like, you needed to surround Malik Willis with some talent. They simply did not do that. Their defense is good. I think their defense is a little bit underrated. Their front 7 is going to be solid, even though they lost Bradley Chubb. But Zach Sealer, Kenneth Grant, Chop Robinson, they have some guys, but they lost Bradley Chubb. They have Jordan Brooks as well, who's one of the most underrated off-ball linebackers in the league. Their secondary should be better. I love Chris Johnson. I love the Chris Johnson pick. They did draft Jacob Rodriguez as well, who I think is a solid player. I think he's a little bit overrated. I don't even think he was the best off-ball linebacker on Texas Tech. I think he benefited a lot from playing behind a Texas Tech defensive line that had Lee Hunter, who went in the 2nd round, that had David Bailey, that went 2nd overall, that had Romello Heights, who went in the 3rd round. Like, he was playing behind NFL caliber defensive linemen in the Big 12. I think that helped him a lot, and he wasn't even the best off-ball linebacker, in my opinion, on Texas Tech last year. So I think he's slightly overrated. But the rest of their draft, in my opinion, was just awful. Chris Bell can't get open. He's a yak merchant. If the number 1 thing you bring to the table is yards after catch, you're going to be a gadget guy. 3rd-round pick on a gadget guy when you just traded Jalen Waddle. Like, who's catching passes from Malik Willis? It's Jalen Tolbert. It's Chris Douglas. It's or Reggie Virgil, I forget, whatever Texas Tech mid receiver they drafted. It's Chris Bell, it's Tutu Atwell, it's Malik Washington. That's awful. That is awful. Their offensive line is garbage. They have one of the worst receiving corps in the NFL. They did give Devon Achane a shitload of money, and I don't hate that, because it's not like they have a lot of money. They don't have a lot of guys that are expecting big extensions, so it's like they have money to spend right now. You might as well spend it, and Achane is going to have to carry that offense, and he will. He is genuinely a top 5 running back in the league. So although it goes against my philosophy of like paying a running back when you're not Super Bowl contender like type of roster. But again, they don't have a lot of money to spend anyway. They don't have a lot of players to spend money on. So I don't hate the contract, although it definitely was a little much. He's a dog, so I don't hate it. But it's just they signed Malik Willis, which I'm not. That's not why I'm calling them losers. It's the fact they signed Malik Willis and then just did nothing to surround him. That's pathetic. And I hate the Jeff Hafley hire. Jeff Hafley, what do you do for me when your team is not that good? Because when Micah Parsons went out, they had 2 sacks the rest of the season. 2. They allowed 28 points per game the rest of the season after Micah Parsons went down against Denver. That second half, fourth quarter collapse against Chicago, that falls on Hafley as much as it falls on the floor. And then they go out and hire him? Like when he lost his good players, the defense stunk. And obviously that's going to happen. Like your defense is going to get worse, but it was straight up awful without Micah Parsons. Get the most out of your players. Derrick Henry ran through their face in like week 15 on that Saturday game. Through their face. A must-win game, big win, playoff implication game against the Ravens. No Lamar Jackson. What do you do? It's just, I'm not a Jeff Hafley guy. I do trust, and yeah. Well, that'll do it for this segment. I'm an idiot, dude. I left my Jeep. I took my mom's Jeep. My parents aren't home, and it was like 80 degrees out today. So I took my mom's Jeep, had the windows down, vibing. I've been home for probably 4 hours. And I was just told that I left the Jeep on for the past 4 fucking hours. That's a bad move there, Chad. That's a bad move. It's okay, though. Everything I just said was facts. I don't remember where I left off, but basically the Miami Dolphins are the biggest losers of this offseason in the AFC because they signed Malik Willis, and what did they do to protect him? Absolutely nothing. They traded away his number 1 option in Jalen Waddle and failed to replace him. The wide receiving core in Miami is Chris Bell, Tutu Atwell, Jalen Tolbert behind one of the worst offensive lines in football. And I love Malik Willis as a I guess, prospect in free agency this year. If he was put in a situation where he could succeed, he's going to be running for his life behind the worst offensive line in the sport last year that had one guy graded in the 60s. That's not even high, but above 60 per PFF last year. And I know PFF isn't the Bible, but that is very telling. And on top of that, they lost Bradley Chubb defensively. They lost Mika Fitzpatrick defensively. I do like the Chris Johnson pick at the end of the first round. He was really productive at San Diego State, but there's a lot of question marks on their defense. I think their front 7 will be fine, but losing Bradley Chubb doesn't help, and their offense in general is just a disaster, and Malik Willis is going to go from one of the best coaches, one of the best situations in Green Bay to the worst situation in the NFL for a quarterback to succeed. I don't think that's a recipe for success. The Miami Dolphins have had a horrendous offseason.